Welcome back to the Lightforge podcast card review, arena card review for March of the Lich King. Yes, we have done the top neutrals, the ones that have actual impact, and now we're going to go over all the cards that don't matter. That's not true. The cards are going to matter because I don't know. Okay, so what's going to happen here is that March of the Lich King had some A tier cards, more so, double the offering rate wise of even Sunken City. But then it has no B plus tier cards, and there's only a few B tier cards, really. And after that's a bunch of C tier cards. And if you look at the past sets, really the past sets have a lot of cards that are around C tier. So this is really just going to kind of like blur into the other sets. Especially Stormwind. Stormwind has a lot of B tier cards. Stormwind did not have A tier cards, but had a lot of B tier cards. So you're going to get a little bit of blurriness. So these cards are, you're going to see them a lot. They have high offering rates. They're draftable, but they're not going to really impact the game in anywhere near the same way as the previous cards we talked about. So let's look at the first card in this category. Remember, it's B tier. B tier means above average in your deck. So yeah, you want these cards, you want to draft them. You're not like jumping with joy when you get them, but like they're fine in your deck. You're happy with them. You're not just like accepting them. Like they're not your bottom half of your deck. They're your top half of the deck. So the first one is Umbral Geist. 2 mana, 3/1 undead, common neutral. Death Rattle, add a random shadow spell to your hand. Yeah. I mean, random shadow spells are pretty good. It's an extra card. Spells are good. It's on Death Rattle, which is not as good as Battle Cry, but, you know, we've seen cards like this before. We know what they are. They're B tier cards. They're good. Not much to say here. Next up, we have Vekerul Necrolite. Vekerul Necrolite is a 2 mana 2/2 undead. Common again. Battle Cry, give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. Okay, so you have to have a friendly minion, and then you buff it, but the buff doesn't do anything unless it dies, and then you get a 2/2 zombie with Rush. So eventually, as long as you can have a target, you will get like 4/4's worth of stats for 2 mana, which is good. But this is not a 2-drop, which is very bad for a 2 mana minion. Very, very bad. You have these conflicting things in this card. And ultimately, it's about like where a Dark Iron Dwarf would be. And a Dark Iron Dwarf is about a B. It's, you know, a little bit worse than a Dark Iron Dwarf even. Mostly because Dark Iron Dwarf is at least a semi-functional 2-drop, and this one is like not really a semi-functional a semi-functional 4-drop, and this one's not a semi-functional 2-drop. Your chances of having something to buff on turn 4 is also a lot higher than on turn 2. Yeah, like it's a card. There's really not much to say about it. It does generate 2 undeads, so it's 2 undead bodies, which is useful for some of the synergies. It's a B tier card. You're going to use it. You're going to see it around. It doesn't have a... It makes the game a little more thinky, especially when they put it on something, or you put it on something and it doesn't die immediately. Because now you always have to think, and I hate this. I'm going to hate this card, by the way. Like, just playing with it and against it. Because now you have to keep track of the fact that your opponent can always pop their minion, or you can pop the minion, and then get 2 more damage on the next turn. And it's this extra thing that you have to keep track of every time on the board. So yeah, it does increase your board math skill and whatever. It's, you know, it's a skillful thing. It's not like a anti-good player thing. It's a pro-good player thing. But it's just very annoying to me. I don't know. Next up, another B tier card is Amber Whelp. So the Bone Dragon is in. The 6 mana 6/5 dragon that gives you a dragon. That's back. There's not a lot of other dragons coming in, and honestly, this was not mathed out with this rotation in mind. This was just kind of mathed out generally. In a high dragon meta, this card's going to be way better. In a low dragon meta, this one's like a little on the low side, but it's not super low. It's like lower than average. This one may be a little lower than a B, but it's coming out at a pretty high B, so I think even if it's a little lower than a B, it's still going to be in the B tier. I don't think it even slips to C+ tier in this meta. Maybe it does. We'll see what the dragon offering rates are. But this is Amber Whelp. It's a 3-mana 3/3 dragon. Battlecry for holding a dragon, deal 3 damage. We've seen this before. It used to say deal 2 damage on an older card. Now you're dealing 3 damage. But as you can see, right, it's just this B tier card. So this power creep, like when I first saw this card, I was like, oh my god, this is terrible. And it is terrible from a gameplay perspective because in a dragon meta, this card becomes insane and is super terrible. But generally, if you're not in a dragon meta, if you're in a normal meta with some dragons, this is kind of the power level these days that you should expect from cards. Alright, so next B tier card is going to be a rare. And I know this is a card, we've talked about this, everyone's talked about this. It's one of the most important cards coming in this meta, even though it is not an A tier card. And it is only a B tier card. It's not even just only a B tier card, it's actually a low B tier card. This card is surprisingly not that good. I mean, it's, you know, better than the average card in your deck slightly. But this is Street Sweeper. 4 mana 2/2, Battlecry, deal 2 damage to all other minions. Okay, it's not a rare card. It is a common card. My bad. So you have a neutral common 2 damage double-sided AoE now in the game. It has an offering rate bonus. It is a B tier card. Even if it's a low B tier card, everyone's going to draft it a lot. This is game-changing. This is flat-out game-changing in terms of what you should expect. And it is super, super tough on aggro. Like this card, and remember, we talked about it before, aggro is already going to do real bad in this meta because there's not enough 1-drops, and you know, one of the best cards in the game is a freaking giant ridiculous taunt that's coming in. It's an A tier card, like, and it's a turn 3 taunt too. Like it's just a terrible time to try to be aggressive. Well, in case you wanted to try it still, Street Sweeper is here to be a slightly above average in your deck card that is kind of just designed to destroy aggression. For such an impactful card, why is it not rated higher? Like, I keep emphasizing it's the low B tier card because I'm trying to also emphasize that you shouldn't draft this that high. Like, I know people who look at this card and they're like, I'm going to draft it like an A tier card because this is what will protect me against all those aggro decks. Not going to be that many aggro decks, if at all. And on top of that, this card's stats are just not that good. Volcanic Potion, if it existed, would barely be a C card. It might be a D+. I think it's still a C, but it's pretty close to a D+. And this is Volcanic Potion for 1 extra mana, which means it's 1 turn delayed, which is pretty big. And you get a 2/2. Is 2/2 good for 1 extra mana? Yes, it is good for 1 extra mana. That's why this is a B, like a very low B card instead of a very low C card. But it's not that much better. You know, that delay of 1 extra turn from being able to Volcanic Potion, that really matters if you get the card that early. Now, Volcanic Potion is mage only. This is neutral. So it's just kind of like, if they were going to do this in this meta, it's a well-designed card, power-wise. I just hate what it does to the meta. This is a very specific ability to give to every single class in the game at an increased offering rate for a neutral common. Alright, one last B tier card, and that is a epic card. This one's weird. It's actually quite straightforward, but it's not straightforward. It's plain, the way you play it is very straightforward, but it's very complicated and wordy. So stay with me. Crystal Broker is an epic neutral card, 3 mana 3/2. You will never play this as a 3 mana 3/2. It has Mana Thirst 5. Summon a random 3-cost minion. So the earliest you play this is when you have 5 mana, and at that point, you can spend 3 mana and get a 3/2 and a random 3-cost minion, which is absurdly good. Now, on top of that, it also has Mana Thirst 10, which summons an 8-cost minion instead. Now, it summons this. I realize I did a math problem wrong. This one is going to be a B+. I'm just going to make this one a B+. It is not an A. This one's a B plus. Got to add the 2 extra mana back in when I switched it over to be 5 mana. Because I had it done as a 3 mana card, and then I'm like, why am I doing this as a 3 mana card? You will never ever play this as a 3 mana, like as a 3 mana turn 3 card. So I switched it to 5 mana. The Mana Thirst 5 is the base, and I gave it 2 extra mana. Except I never gave it 2 extra mana, so it's just missing 2 mana. So it's going to come out to be a B plus actually here. Anyway, Mana Thirst 10 is summon an 8 cost minion instead. So if this is 10 mana, it is a 3 mana, 8 cost random minion with a 3/2 attached to it, which is really good in a lot of stats, but that's 10 mana. You gotta wait a lot for it. Okay. There's not much to say about this. Don't wait too long for it. It's totally fine to play after turn 5. What's a random 3 cost minion? Probably like a 3/3, maybe a 4/3, maybe a 3/4 with a 3/2. That is worth way more than 3 mana. That is worth like, honestly, like 4.5 mana probably. So just get the advantage there. You don't want to be holding this card for 5 more turns just to get the extra advantage. Like, use this card. Now, if this card comes into your hand on turn 8, definitely on turn 9, yeah, you'll wait a little bit extra, right? And if you top deck this card way later, it gets the extra anyway, so you're set. So it is it's a good card. So yeah, okay, fine. We'll make this is a B plus. I like, as I'm looking at it and as I'm explaining it, I'm like, why did I? Okay, so those are the B tier cards. They're just like, you see, we're going a little quickly through these because they're kind of simple. The neutral cards in this set may have a lot of words attached to it, but ultimately they don't do anything new. You guys know what to do with these cards already. There's one more card that is a B tier card, but it is a B tier, it's special because it is only a B tier card for Death Knight. For every other class, it is a C plus tier card. So I'm going to use this to bridge our way into C plus. This is Bone Flinger. It is a neutral common, 2 mana, 2/3 undead. Battle Cry. If a friendly undead died your last turn, deal 2 damage. After your last turn, deal 2 damage. So this is the normal undead mechanic. The normal undead mechanic is if a friendly undead died after your last turn. So from the end of your last turn goes your opponent's turn. Your opponent can kill one of your undead minions and it counts. Or it's your turn again, and then if you kill an undead minion on this turn, it also counts. As long as you do it before you play the Bone Flinger or whatever other card with this kind of synergy. It's kind of a convoluted way to shuffle around a normal synergy, but they wanted to make it flavorful with the, dying, popping back to life immediately kind of thing. So this one's Bone Flinger. There's a picture of a zombie skeleton thing that's holding its arm, and it's going to fling its arm to deal 2 damage. So if a friendly undead died after your last turn, this guy basically picks up its arm and like throws it for 2 damage. With Death Knight, you can guarantee the trigger by using your hero power on this turn. So then it becomes a 4 mana, deal 1 damage to your opponent's face, deal 2 damage to something, and a 2/3. It's not like the best thing, but it's a good option, right? It's a good extra option to have, and that pushes it over the edge. It was already a high C plus because you could have regular undeads. All right, so that's Bone Flinger. So another word about the undead synergies. Because of the offering bonus and the fact that a lot of the neutral cards and just regular cards in March of the Lich King is just going to be flat out better or around the same as the older sets. Like, they're going to be flat out better than the older sets, and they're going to be about the same as like Stormwind. You're going to end up picking a bunch of undead. So even though there's not that many undead that's being added to the pool, they're going to have offer rate boosts, and you're going to want to pick enough of them that the undead synergies, they're going to be semi-consistent for every single class. This is not one of those synergies that you like rarely see. This is like a beast synergy for hunters in a normal setting or something. Like, you're going to be able to use them. You're not going to be able to like get them all the time super consistently, but you guys see the undead cards, right? Plenty of the good cards are undead cards. Okay, now let's go on to the C+. C+ means barely worse than the average card in your deck. Like, they're still very good. And we went over Bone Flinger. Let's talk about the next one, Infected Peasant. The Infected Peasant is a 2-mana, 2/1 with a Death Rattle. Summon a 2/2 Undead Peasant. Whenever your main body and your Death Rattle has the same attack, you effectively just have like a Divine Shield effect. Right? So this might as well be a 2/2 with a Divine Shield for 2 mana. And those are good. That's a C+. This is like a shielded minibot. Shielded minibot is a C+ these days. Next up, Drakari Embalmer. Drakari Embalmer is a 3-mana, 3/4 undead. Battlecry, give a friendly undead reborn. Again, you're going to have some undeads. You guys see a bunch of undeads. We've just been going over a whole bunch of undeads. They're not like the best cards to be reborn, but they do work. And Drakari Embalmer is going to be able to do that. And later on, you may hit one of the big ones and really, really get it to work. Reborn obviously synergizes with Death Rattles, so even something like the card we were talking about before, the Infected Peasant, maybe reborning a 2/1 is not your idea of the best value for reborn, but you also get another 2/2 after that if you reborn this. So it can get some value. Otherwise, it's a 3-mana, 3/4 undead. Like, totally good on curve 3-drop. Sun Fury Clergy is what is next. Sun Fury Clergy, which I cannot find. Why can I not find? There we go. Sun Fury Clergy, another common neutral, 3-mana, 2/4. Battlecry, restore 3 health to all friendly characters. Mana Thirst 6, restore 6 health instead. So this is like Earthen Ring Farseer, except it does it to everything friendly rather than just one target. That being said, I don't know how many times you had an Earthen Ring Farseer and you're like, I wish it could heal multiple targets. Rarely happens. Mana Thirst 6 makes it heal 6 instead of 3. That makes it a bit better, but it's not something so good you would ever want to actually like wait for. And it's a C+ overall, which is pretty good for a heal card. After that, we have our last C+ card, which is Infectious Ghoul. Infectious Ghoul is one of the most interesting cards and one of the first cards they revealed. It's a rare card. It is a 5-mana, 5/4 undead. Death Rattle. Give a random friendly minion. Death Rattle. Summon an Infectious Ghoul. So this has the potential to be a never-ending chain of Infectious Ghouls. If you even get one more Infectious Ghoul out of it, you have gotten way more value than what a 5-drop would be worth. But it's on a Death Rattle, which means you can't guarantee it to trigger. You play this card, and your opponent gets the first shot to kill this if you don't have another random friendly minion, or to kill another friendly minion and make sure this one can't die. Or your opponent can just do a lot of things to make sure this Death Rattle never triggers. Now, they have to do all those things, and that in itself is a value. But if they can make it so the Death Rattle never triggers, you just played a 5-mana, 5/4, and that really, really sucks. Huge swing card one way or the other. It's obviously better for better players because they're more likely to have a board, but the swing is also huge, which is not good for better players. But overall, it's a very interesting card that is like pretty good. I'm thankful that it is not more powerful in the arena, because if it is more powerful in the arena, it's not like you don't want to win by Infectious Ghoul, right? Like I don't know that you would feel too good. Like the game gets very samey if Infectious Ghoul wins a significant amount of games. So one, I'm glad it's rare and not common. I wish it were epic. It feels like an epic card. And two, I'm glad it's not more powerful. Okay, that's it for the C+ cards. We are now moving on to the C tier cards. C tier cards are better than a Yeti. That's how I define them. Better than a Yeti. They could be somewhat better, but they're not coming close to the average card in your deck. right? There's a gap between Yeti and average card in deck. And C tier is most of that gap. C plus tier is the part that's right on the edge of being the average card in your deck. So Incorporeal Corporal is our first card here. It is a 2-mana 5/5 undead. Whoa, that seems really good. Except after this minion attacks, destroy it. So it's like a delayed 5 damage. Your opponent does have the choice to kill it beforehand, but they would have to spend a lot more resources on it than if you just do it. But a delayed 2-mana 5 damage is not that bad. Like, you do get to control where it goes. It's not like Snipe, where your opponent controls where it goes. You get to control what this one hits. You can also not attack with it if you don't have a good target. Yeah. It's, I like this card. I think it's a design that hasn't been explored as much, and it's a pretty common card game design, and they're finally like kind of putting this in. It makes for interesting decisions to be made, and is a pretty high skill card for both sides. Okay. Next up, we have wait, what? I messed up. What did I tell you guys Vecro Necrolite is? Did I tell you guys Vecro Necrolite was a B? Vecro Necrolite? I messed up on this. Vecro Necrolite, this is what happens when there's no merp saying like, hey, what are you doing? Because I have it written here, like in the chart. Vecro Necrolite is a C. It is not a B. That is why we're comparing it to Dark Iron Dwarf and finding it lower than Dark Iron Dwarf. I was like, wow, Dark Iron Dwarf is a B? Dark Iron Dwarf is either a very low B or a C+. And Vecro Necrolite is a C. So we've already talked about Vecro Necrolite. That's the 2-mana 2/2 undead. Battlecry, give a friendly minion death rattle. Summon a 2/2 zombie with rush. This is a C, not a B. Did I miss a card? Okay. The B tier card that I did not talk about, that I mixed up with, here's the actual B tier card. The actual B tier card is Bloodied Knight. Okay, so let's talk. Okay, so because I messed this up, we're back in the B tier now. We're back in better than the average card in your deck a little. And this is Bloody Knight. Bloody Knight is a 3-mana 4/5. At the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to your hero. So it's a Yeti for 3 mana, and it keeps dealing 2 damage to you each time. Dealing damage to you for early game tempo is good. This one is a B. That's just what it comes out as. It would be pretty uncontroversial. Alright, sorry I messed that up, guys. But Vecro Necrolite is a C. Not even a C+, but a C. Okay, next C is Brittle Skin Zombie. Brittle Skin Zombie is a 3-mana 4/3 undead. Death rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, deal 3 damage to them. I mean, it's a 3-mana 4/3. The 3 damage to your opponent's face doesn't really matter that much. It's attached to a death rattle. I think there was like a card that was like this before for Priest or whatever. But yeah, it's a C. A normal 3-mana 4/3 would be like a very, very low C. And this one is like a slightly less low C. It's whatever. Next up is Shatterskin Gargoyle, if I find it. Shatterskin Gargoyle. Oh, it is a 6-mana card. That's why I couldn't find it for a while. Shatterskin Gargoyle is a 6-mana 4/6 taunt. It is undead. Death rattle, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. I mean, the 4 damage to a random enemy, I hate these kind of card designs because it's not random enemy minion. It's just a random enemy. It could hit the face. You don't know what's happening with it. Like, it's still a decent amount of damage. Your opponent could make it so that it deals face because they run out of minions, but they're not in full control of that. A 4/6 taunt should be like 5 mana. I think a 4/6 taunt for 5 mana would get a C. This is for 6 mana, so it's you know not as good. But then dealing 4 damage, even on a death rattle, is kind of worth the extra mana. I hate this card, but it exists and it's draftable. Like it's a little better than a Yeti. Next up is Coroner. We are now onto the rare cards. We're still in the C category. Coroner is a 2-mana 2/2 Battlecry, freeze an enemy minion. Mana Thirst 6, silence it first. So, silencing it first works as a silence, and then you get a bonus freeze attached to it. It does stuff. You can silence a whole bunch of stuff. You can silence a taunt, and then freezing it basically puts it out of commission for another turn, and you go forward. You can silence a death rattle so that, you know, you just silence it so it doesn't trigger or an ability. 2-mana 2/2s are just not good, though. Like, it doesn't do enough for it to be better than a C. But it's a very usable card. Like, this is just kind of well balanced for the arena. And the Mana Thirst 6, I remember I talked about how Mana Thirst value is very attached to the delta between the mana cost and the Mana Thirst cost. 4 is a decent amount. Especially for a 2-mana 2/2, to not be able to play it, not just on 2, but as a filler card on 4 or 5. And even when you get to 6, you're kind of looking for a target. Like, there's a lot of waiting around for this card, and it doesn't do that much after you wait around for it for a while. Totally fine card to have in your deck. You know, better than a Yeti, but not spectacular. All right, that is the Coroner. Next up is a Tenacious Sandland. If I can find it. Tenacious Sandland. Sandlane. Tenacious Sandlane. It's a 5-mana 4/6, lifesteal. Whenever this attacks, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. The 5-mana 4/6, which is bad, but then it has lifesteal, which makes up for it, and then it also deals some extra face damage. Like, it's a C. There's nothing much to say about it. Translocation Instructor is next. This one's another rare card. It is also a C. 5-mana 4/4. Battlecry. Choose an enemy minion. Swap it with a random one in their deck. Whoa! Here's where half of you are going to be like, ADWCTA, you lost your mind. You lost your mind. You have not only a neutral hard removal here, but one that basically it transforms the minion, right? It polymorphs the minion. And it's only a C? It's only slightly better than a Yeti? No way. You're crazy. But think about how this card actually works. 5-mana 4/4, and then you're getting rid of a minion, presumably a pretty big minion, and you're swapping with a random one in your opponent's deck, which is presumably a mid-sized minion, let's say a 4/4. So you reduce something like an 8/8 to a 4/4. That's all you've done. And you may have silenced something if it has a death rattle or something, but for the most part, we know what polymorphs get used on. Just big things with no death rattles. Like, it's valuable. It's more valuable than an assassinate, but not that much more valuable. And most importantly, is not even that there's not that much of a stat difference between all of this. Most importantly, is that it's a freaking random enemy minion. Do you know how much random swing you are just introducing into the game with this card? This card is terrible for good players. It can lose you the game. It could also win you the game, but normal cards will also win you the game if you're a good player. And remember, we're in an era right now where apparently these are just like wild rotations with like not super ridiculous cards except for a few that is in this set. So, do you want a Translocation Instructor that's Sentinel? Yes. Yes, that is an excellent target. But if it pops out like your opponent's 6-mana card, you haven't gained that much. And you spent 5 mana doing a weird transformation, only gotten a 4/4 out of it, and a little bit of a nerf onto the minion. Like, if it said, choose an enemy minion, replace it with a 4/4, this card would be way better. But that RNG of potentially replacing it with another big minion so that it does nothing, or potentially replacing it with a taunt that totally screws you over somehow, or who knows what the hell could happen with it, that's a pretty big risk for a good player to take. Alright. So that's Translocation Instructor. Don't fall for it. Like, it's not a bad card. I'd take it over a Yeti, but do not highly prioritize this card. Maybe if your entire deck and or class has no hard removals, like, I don't know, you're a druid or something, like, you could be like, okay, I kind of needed to fill a very specific function, but it's just not that good of a card. And it's an even worse card for a good player. Alright, another C tier card is Sanctum Spellbinder. This one's epic, I think. Yeah, this one's epic. It's a 4 mana 3/6. Whenever your opponent targets another minion with a spell, redirect it to this. Helps you protect a minion, maybe, but only from spells that target a specific minion. It's worth something, the ability, but it's not a really insanely good ability or anything. So it's a C. A 4 mana 3/6 by itself would be a very low C. It would be a Yeti, basically, right? So this ability isn't doing that much. Better than a Yeti, but not by much. And another C tier card is a legendary, the Sunwell. The Sunwell is a 9 mana holy spell that says fill your hand with random spells. Cost 1 less for each other card in your hand. So for each thing that you don't get a spell for, this spell costs 1 mana less. So you're getting something. You're either getting 1 mana less for the spell, or you're getting a random spell in your hand. Obviously, you'd rather have a random spell. This one's a C. 9 mana is a lot of mana. Even if it's lower, that draw is it's a hefty draw, but you're still going to use a lot of mana to do the draw. This ends up being something like a sprint, only instead of drawing cards from your deck, you draw random spells. Remember, they're not discover spells, they're just random spells. On the bright side, you're drawing a lot of them, so the bad random spells you probably never have to use. You could just use the good ones, but that's a lot of randomness, and you're not drawing... You're drawing a lot of cards, but you're spending a lot of mana, right? Or you're not drawing a lot of cards, and you're not spending a lot of mana. Just the random spells are not as good as you think they are. You know what random spells are. We've had plenty of mage cards that generate random spells, and mage is one of those classes with generally better spells. And they kind of do work, but also kind of not. And this is that sprint effect, right? You play it, and you don't do anything else that turn. Maybe you get to do one more thing. You also don't get to actually control how many spells you draw. It's based on the number of cards in your hand. So, you don't control the mana cost of this. It's based on the number of cards in your hand. So if you get it later on, you're just gonna have to skip a turn and get a bunch of cards. If you get it earlier, you could have a choice of slowing down and getting a couple more cards, or not, or try to play a few more cards so you get more cards and spend more mana. There's a lot of choice built in, but at the end of the day, it's still just random spells, still a huge risk, still skipping most of a turn. All right, next we're going to go over 2 cards that are C tier in Death Knight and D+ tier in not Death Knight. These are going to be some of your undead synergies. The first one is Arms Dealer. Arms Dealer is better than a Yeti for Death Knight, a little worse than a Yeti for non-Death Knights. It is a 1 mana 1/2 undead. After you summon an undead, give it +1 attack. Obviously, if you're a Death Knight, it makes your hero power be a 2/1 charge instead of a 1/1 charge. So that's worth a significant amount. And it's an evergreen ability, so you can do it every single turn if you're a Death Knight and this thing doesn't die. Makes it pretty good. But even if you're not a Death Knight, every undead you summon gets +1 attack. There's a lot of undeads, and it's summon, not not play. So all the reborns will work for this as well. Next one is Banshee. Another 1 mana card, 1 mana 2/1, undead. Death Rattle. Give a random friendly undead +2/+1. You need an undead for this to be any good. So, good luck getting the undead. The problem with this and Death Knight is that you can't really play it on the same turn. You have to play this, it has to live, and then you have to use your Death Knight hero power. And then the health doesn't really matter because it's going to die at the end of the turn and it just becomes deal 3 damage instead of deal 1. So it's just kind of situational, but this card is just kind of situational to begin with. But if it does trigger, it's really powerful. So you're just kind of weighing how often you can get this card to trigger. And like I said, there's a decent amount of undeads that you're going to draft. So you're just going to have undeads hanging around. If you play it as a 1-drop, and your opponent has a ping, you're just forcing your opponent to ping, which is still something, right? Because that's the same thing, even if this was like a 5/1 for 1 mana. If you're playing it later on, you could play it with another undead, and then they have to get rid of that undead and then ping this as well to not get the benefit. Otherwise, you'll get a 4/2. That's 6 stats for 1 mana, which is pretty good. All right, we are through the C's, and we're through some of the D pluses that we just talked about. Let's look at one more D plus. This is what is this? Lush Behemoth. Lush Behemoth. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, here we go. Flesh Behemoth is a D plus card. It is a 9 mana 4/8 taunt. That seems very crappy. Death Rattle. Draw another undead and summon a copy of it. So it's a 4/8 taunt that brings up another minion out of your deck to get a copy of. Is that worth 9 mana? Not by a long shot. Well, you also get a copy of the undead in your hand. Okay, so you've drawn an extra minion. Fine, but it's still not great. Ends up being a D+. It's one of the rare cards that is not as good as a Yeti, even. I think it's meant for some kind of synergies if you only put specific undeads in your deck or something. Like either really big ones or really, really important ones that you want to draw anyway and summon. But in Arena, this does not really work well. But still, right? Like, why is it a D plus then? Why is it not an F? It's still a big thing. And in Arena, big things just has value. And it's a big thing with taunt that gives it extra value. Even if it's not worth it for the stats or whatever, it's still doing something. Like sometimes you just need 8 stuff of taunt. Or sometimes you just need a lot of stuff. And a 4/8 plus another thing on the board plus another card in your hand is still a lot of stuff, even if 9 mana is inefficient. Alright. Finally, we have another D plus card, which is Plague Spreader. This one's epic. 4 mana 4/4 undead. Death Rattle, transform a random minion in your opponent's hand into a Plague Spreader. This could be really good if you get that, Sire that your opponent's been holding. And there's going to be some cards your opponents are holding that are good. But they're probably also holding other cards. And this is a random card. It is not Discover. You do not have to go and, you do not get to pick. It is just random. So if they're just holding 3 cards, you have 1/3 of the chance to hit the big bomb, assuming your opponent even has a big bomb. And again, your opponent doesn't have a lot of big bombs nowadays. Remember this rotation. It's going to be a pretty mild, low power rotation. This is not going to be a rotation where Plague Spreader is going to shine. It's a D plus because it's only slightly better than a 4/4. This ability. Because it can also transform non-cards in your opponent's hands, like bananas or coins or whatever, into Plague Spreaders, which are 4/4 minions. Further, if you have a bomb, you cannot play this card. It is an unplayable card. because you do not want to give your opponent the chance to get your bomb transformed. Like, it's a very interestingly designed card, and it's not terrible. So in Arena, you'll still see it. I think some people will think it's actually very good, and they're wrong. But you'll see it, and it'll be annoying. But ultimately, the effect is going to be sporadically game-winning, but for the most part, not very impressive. Okay. Now we are down to the D cards. These are worse than a croc. You really don't want these cards in your deck, but they're not like unplayable. You'll still sometimes be forced to draft cards that are worse than a croc, but you're definitely not happy with these. First one is Foul Egg. 1 mana 0/2 undead. Death Rattle, summon a 3/3 undead chicken. It's an egg. Eggs are worse than crocs. Eggs are not undraftable. There's plenty of things that buff eggs, and there's plenty of things that just require you to have an undead thing on the board. Remember all the random stuff that requires an undead thing on the board? Kind of a liability if your opponent plays a Foul Egg for you to just like keep it around, because plenty of good cards utilize undead stuff. So it's a D, which is pretty high for an egg, but eggs have just kind of gotten decent these days. Next one is a Silver Moon Arcanist. Remember, we are still at the D level, below a croc. Silver Moon Arcanist is a 3 mana 2/2. Spell damage +2. Battle Cry. Your spells can't target heroes this turn. The spell damage card. I didn't break it down to what class uses spell damage more or whatever. It's just not a good card. If you have the spells, this is somewhat draftable. Still going to be worse than a croc. It's better than 4 mana 2/2 spell damage +2, which was the prior card that existed in neutral. But it's still bad. It is a D. Use your judgment. See if you have the combo pieces, but you probably won't. And this card's unplayable by itself. That's it for the Ds. We are going to wrap this up with a F+ card and an F card. The F+ card is a Magma Rager. We call it a Scourge Rager. I don't know why I can't find it. There we go. But it's a common card. It's a 3 mana 5/4 undead, reborn, Battlecry die. So it's a 5/1 because it gets reborn after it dies. I mean, this 5/4 is fine for like being pulled out of your deck or like, something like that. So it's not like the 5/4 is totally useless, but for the most part, it's useless. It's just a 3 mana 5/1. Yeah, it's a F+. Finally, there's actually a F tier card. It is a legendary. It's not meant for the arena. It is Bone Lord Frost Whisperer. Bone Lord Frost Whisperer is a 6 mana 6/6 undead, and you may be thinking, hey, that's not unplayable in arena. Well, the death rattle is, for the rest of the game, your first card each turn costs 0 mana. You die in 3 turns. I'll be honest, no math was involved in this. Just don't draft it. Having a 0 cost card per turn after this thing dies, so you first have to kill it to begin with, is not going to win you the game. At least not very fast. Like, you're not just going to have a handful of like 8 mana cards waiting to go. You're going to be playing like, maybe 1 8 mana card and then like, I don't know, a 5 mana card, and then like you're dead. Is that 8 mana card and 5 mana card going to win you the game in that short period? No. This is like constructed level pacing. This is not arena level pacing. The best thing about this card may be that it may not die. It may be a 6 mana 6/6. And 6 mana 6/6s have values. They're like a D card or whatever. So if it doesn't die, it's not super terrible. But, I didn't math this out. It could be like an F+, because maybe it won't die. Or maybe it'll be a long time before it dies, and then the game's decided by that point anyway. but then it's a 6 mana 6/6. Like its ability, like once it dies, you're in trouble. Not like once it dies, oh goody, I get to like, play stuff. So yeah, like I rated it an F. It could be an F plus. I don't know. I don't know how you math out you die in 3 turns. But just don't draft it. This is not a good. This is definitely not a good arena card. This is definitely not an okay arena card. This is definitely a bad arena card. And if you're a skillful player, you just kind of want to avoid cards like these anyway, right? Like much less cards like these that are actually bad on top of that. All right, that's it for all the neutral cards. As you see, there's a couple of game changers in these like rest of the not super good ones. Like Street Sweeper is the big one, the big one, because it's a double-sided board clear. You have Translocator Instructor, which is a neutral hard removal that also silences. You have I forgot what card it was. One of these 2 mana cards that silences and freezes. I think is it Coroner? I think it may be Coroner. So those are game-changing cards, but they're not that good. So the rest of the cards are just pretty normal cards. They may have some quirks to it, but this is a very neutral set. And at the end of the day, none of these cards are going to matter all that much because Silver Moon Sentinel exists. Silver Moon Armorer exists. And the Rubian Vizier exists. They're just going to overshadow all of these cards. In a normal set, you would get way more Bs, by the way. There are, if you don't count Bone Flayer for Death Knight, for like normal classes, 1, 2, 3, 4 B tier cards and 1 epic B tier card. In Nathria, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You had 8 non-legendary in B tier for Nathria. In Sunken City, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You had 11. Like, there's just not a lot of B tier cards in this set. It's very low. Even if you add A and B tier cards, it's kind of on the low side. Most of March of the Lich King is on the low power level side. And maybe that's why they decided to go with the overall low power level rotation, because they really wanted to have March of the Lich King shine, and that's kind of what you have to do for that to happen. But just beware. The power discrepancy is still there. It's not like this is a low power neutral set. This is a high power neutral set at the top. Vizier and your 2 Silver Moon Sentinel and Armorers, that's high. Your Enchanter and Hawkstrider Rancher, that's high. But the rest just kind of doesn't cut it for a modern set. It's a very weak modern set on the neutrals for the non-top. And the top is the most powerful that we've seen by offering rate. So that's the split. Normally we do 3 splits on neutrals. This time we only do 2 because that's what made sense. And yeah, I want to give a shout out to our Patreons at patreon.com/grinandgoat. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support us on the Patreon. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on the podcast, that is the way to support us. We don't do a lot of things, we're not the kind of people who like give you stuff for supporting us monetarily, but we do really appreciate it, and helps us keeps us motivated, not so much for the amount of money that we get, but for the fact that people find this important enough to be supporting us with their hard-earned cash. Same for the people who retweet us, for the people who introduce their friends or other members of the community to the podcast. Keep everybody. We just really appreciate everything that you do, whether it's on the Patreon with some money or with some likes and retweets and just mentions of places. All really appreciate it. And that's it for March of the Lich King Neutrals. We are now moving on to the class cards, which I hope will go faster than this, because without Merps, I thought I was going to speed through this, but we're now 2.5 hours in and we haven't done a single class yet. So we'll see if this pushes me past midnight. All right. Until Demon Hunter, this is ADWCTA.